making the GrowthBusters documentary free from now on, and a follow-up to our Billionaires in Space episode. Next on GrowthBusters.
Calling. Call a GrowthBuster. Whoa.
Well, hey, welcome to a new episode of the GrowthBusters podcast, where we try to help everyone around the world come to terms with limits to growth. I'm Dave Gardner, director of the documentary GrowthBusters Hooked on Growth, and glad to have my new co-host circling back for another episode. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Gardner, daughter of the biggest growth buster out there, Dave, and happy to be joining as his co-host for the podcast.
Great to have you. Before we get to the two headline items, I want to quickly share a little bit of listener feedback. I try to do that whenever I have time. We did get an email from Dorothy regarding episode 58, which was Billionaires in Space, which we will be talking about a little later. We'll put a link in the show notes to that episode. Dorothy emailed, "Great podcast. Monbiot comments resonate with most of us." So that was good to hear. She was referring to George Monbiot, who is an overpopulation denier, otherwise a pretty good columnist for the UK Guardian and crusader for sustainability, but he's got a blind spot when it comes to overpopulation. Thanks for emailing us, Dorothy. And if you have any feedback for us, the best way to get that to us is to just send an email to podcast@growthbusters.org. So first up, Stephanie, want to provide an update on the crowdfunding campaign, which hopefully everyone is listening to that the last week of October. If you're listening in November, you can probably still go to the campaign and pitch in, but we've got this major milestone and deadline at midnight Eastern Time on the night of October 31st. Don't wait till the last minute, but we're recording this episode on Monday, October 25th, the final week of this grand crusade to raise at least $10,000 so that we can continue our important work and not rely on sales and rentals and screening fees of GrowthBusters Hooked on Growth, but we can make that free starting, I think the plan was to flip the switch on November 3rd, which is the 10-year anniversary of our world premiere that we held in Washington, D.C. Anyway, as we record, we're at over $8,400, so we're just nearly there.
Yeah, that's awesome. We're so close.
Yeah. And I think about the first $4,000 came in just in the first few days of the campaign, really fast. So that tells me that there are a lot of people out there who recognize the importance of the film and the messages in the film. That reminds me, there's something I want you to hear. We're helping Scientists Warning Europe with a podcast series called Planet in Crisis that launched in the spring of this year, 2021. And a couple of weeks ago, I published episode 13 titled Dark Optimism, Life After Economic Growth, a Future Worth Fighting For. And the presenter of that session, Sean Chamberlain, kind of had an explanation about why he shifted his work. And I'd like to play that for you right now.
And so we're in this dilemma. Growth can't continue, but growth must continue on our current paradigm. And this is why I stopped working on climate policy, actually, because I could see that we were never going to get any meaningful, adequate climate policy through our current political system. And our current culture, which for all the problems does elect these politicians, there are wider shifts in our cultural values and our sense of what's unfolding on the planet that are necessary before all the really wonderful people that I know who are working on great climate policy are going to be able to actually deliver what they know how to deliver.
I wanted you to hear that because I think the great shifts in culture that Sean Chamberlain was talking about are exactly the shifts that I intended to catalyze when I produced the movie GrowthBusters Hooked on Growth.
Yeah, and I think that the documentary film gives some good ideas to folks of what those specific cultural shifts could look like.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the film shows a future path that people can take. And I know sometimes fighting climate change feels very overwhelming and daunting, but I think you did a great job of showing some individuals out there that are out in their communities, making some of that change from the ground up. And that's so inspiring and a really important message to take away.
Yeah, and I included those segments because I didn't want the film to be too depressing. I wanted to show some signs of hope. But, if you were trying to catalog all of the good efforts out there to reinvent our culture and shift it from a culture of more and more and more to a culture of enough, gosh, there's probably more than 100, I imagine. And so I think the most important thing is just what I'm hoping to do is reset the operating system that feeds and drives and fuels all of those efforts. So I'm not going to pick the best efforts out there. Obviously, happy to recommend a few when somebody asks about them. But as long, everything that we as the human race do that is founded on a foundation of living within our means on the planet, has great possibilities. Anything that we do that's founded on this notion that there's always got to be more, that bigger is better, it's pretty much doomed to fail, I think.
Yeah, and one other thing that I really love about the documentary is, we're receiving these entrenched messages from all sides, right? You show a lot of newspaper headlines, you show clips of newscasters, and we're always being fed this message that economic growth is good and population growth is good. And you really help us question those messages so that we're armed with filtering that in a more common sense way when we receive those. And also we're able to kind of share that message with our friends and family, because sometimes when we're living in this culture where that's the dominant messaging, it's hard to know how to talk about it and break those things down into, what's really going on here.
Yeah, good point. So I don't want to beat the film subject to death too much, but I do want to give a quick shout out to Australian multimillionaire Dick Smith, who made an early and significant contribution to the crowdfunding campaign. Population Media Center also pitched in, and Lee Badger, Cliff Ware, and Tom Breckenridge were early supporters with significant donations. And then a big thanks and shout out to Mike Hanauer, who most recently offered up to $1,000 in matching funds for the donations that came in last week. And I think the deadline for that was midnight on Saturday. The big deadline is, as we mentioned, midnight on October 31st. We'll put a link in the show notes to the campaign, but if you visit the campaign, which is at fundraiser.com/GrowthBustersMovie, you spell fundraiser FUNDRAZR, fundraiser.com/GrowthBustersMovie. If you head over there and you see that maybe we'll already be at $10,000 by the time you go, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't pitch in, because the truth is I selected a pretty modest goal because I just wasn't sure how much people were going to be inspired to pitch in. And these funds are going to go into the bank in place of the movie sales and rentals and screening fees that we're no longer going to be getting from the film, to help cover the costs of doing several important GrowthBusters initiatives, this podcast for one, but also, maybe we'll send leftover DVDs to libraries, because I'm not going to continue selling DVDs. We're going to make the movie free on YouTube. But a lot of libraries, they like to have physical copies on the shelves for those people who go in and physically browse. And I'd like to do a lot more advertising on YouTube to attract some new movie viewers once it is free on YouTube. And absolutely got to produce that GrowthBusters music video that will be to the tune of the GrowthBusters theme that you heard a little bit of at the beginning of this podcast. You'll hear more of it at the end, so be sure to listen to the very end. A fabulous song written by Jake Fader and vocalized by Carlos Jones. And I think the world needs to hear the whole song, and we're going to put visuals to it to go with that. So those are just a few of the things that $10,000 or let's say maybe $12,000 or why not $15,000 can go toward.
Yeah, I'm so excited to see how some of those future projects come out. And I think there's a few cool perks too for folks that are able to contribute, which is always sort of a fun way to support and share the word, with bumper stickers and things like that.
Well, thanks. Thanks for your good words, Stephanie. So let's move on to the major topic for this episode, which is a follow-up on the Billionaires in Space episode that we did 2 episodes ago. As I mentioned, we'll put a link in the show notes to get you back to that episode. I think what really inspired me, Stephanie, to want to kind of continue the conversation was mainly the fact that I discovered a really excellent essay written by Tim Jackson titled Billionaire Space Race, the Ultimate Symbol of Capitalism's Flawed Obsession with Growth. And that was actually published before we even recorded our Billionaires episode, but we just hadn't discovered it. And I had discovered it by the time we posted the episode, so there's a link in the show notes to that essay, and of course there'll be a link in this episode's show notes as well. But Tim Jackson's a really smart guy. He's the author of an excellent book called Prosperity Without Growth, published in 2009. He's professor of sustainable development and director of the Center for the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity at the University of Surrey. So a pretty impressive job that he has. And this essay isn't a short 2 or 3 minute read. I'm not sure how long it takes. It might take you 10 minutes to read it.
Yeah, I think between 10 and 15 minutes or so. But well worth it.
Yeah, if you're racing through your day and that seems like too long, then it'll be your loss. But it's really worth pouring a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and sitting back and reading the whole thing and letting it sit with you. I've been doing too much talking, so I'll let you start. Stephanie, was there anything in particular that really jumped out at you?
Well, I think the overarching arc of his message is he acknowledges the appeal of the space race and how it kind of feeds our inner child, right? And the excitement, and we talked about this in our Billionaires episode as well, the cultural obsession with space exploration and adventure. And he was talking about how he was a young boy during the initial space race in the 1960s and how that really captivated everyone. But he goes on to say that we're at a completely different point culturally, and there's a lot of different things that are more important going on the planet today. And the space race was, something important at that point in time. And now maybe our focus should be more on what's happening on planet Earth and the people that are on planet Earth. And maybe his point is we need to grow the up, right? Like we need to set aside those kind of boyish dreams that people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are doing right now. And we need to solve some of the most critical issues that we're facing as humanity on the planet today.
Yeah, he wrote toward the end of the essay, but for all its glamour, the final frontier is at best an amusement and at worst a fatal distraction from the urgent task of rebuilding a society ravaged by social injustice, climate change, and a loss of faith in the future. He definitely, it got my attention because he recognized that, and he definitely beat up a little bit on this, the current billionaire space race. He wrote, and now suddenly along comes a group of self-confessed technology lovers finally admitting that the planet is too small for us. Yes, you were right, they imply. The Earth cannot sustain infinite growth. That's why we have to expand into space. These billionaires can't accept limits to growth, or they choose not to. I'm not sure. But it's, they've grown up in this culture of more, and it would take, I don't know what it would take. It would take an epiphany of some kind for them to come to the realization that maybe we should be content with reinventing society right here on Earth and making a beautiful life for our children and their children right here that isn't so dependent on technological marvels.
Yeah, I think it continues to highlight for me just how out of touch these billionaires seem to be with the plight of so many people on the planet that don't have the essentials. And, I think Tim Jackson, one thing that he wrote was, let's focus on the quintessentially earthly priorities. He mentions affordable health care, decent homes for the poorest in society, a solid education for our kids. We're talking about some of the most basic, fundamental human rights that not everyone on the planet has. And can we try and focus on those things and lifting everyone up instead of these billionaires trying to maximize their profits for their own companies, I keep thinking about, what if everyone at SpaceX or Blue Origin, all of the talent, all of the resources were focused on solving these issues, focused on solving climate change? Where would we be?
Yeah, and I got to say, I don't officially want to be on the record of being against space exploration. I think it's a fundamental part of science. We need to be curious. We need to explore the oceans too. They're so unexplored at this point. But I think why we explore needs to be really carefully examined. And I think maybe when we explore, just because right now, we need to have a global project to burn as little fossil fuels as possible and get our energy appetite restrained so that climate change doesn't just completely derail us to the point where who knows if we would ever be able to explore space if we're even around in 100 years.
Yeah.
We might need to delay a little bit.
Well, I'm happy to go on the record as saying I'm willing to set aside space exploration for a few decades while we get all of this figured out and set ourselves on a sustainable course that brings, equity to both humans and all of the other creatures we share this planet with. We're very far from that point right now.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And maybe as a final point, I thought it was interesting that Jackson points out that Aristotle wrote, "The good life is not a relentless search for more, but a continual process of finding a virtuous balance between too little and too much." It's about balance.
That quote also spoke to me a lot.
Yeah, that was great. So a couple other last words on the Billionaires in Space. Of course, since those launches in July, we've had more launches. September 18th, Elon Musk, his SpaceX company, sent 4 civilians into Earth to orbit on the Inspiration 4 mission, which was an impressive step forward. And on October 13th, Blue Origin sent another capsule into space with William Shatner on board. And those were newsworthy events, even though we would like to see that put on hold, wouldn't we? And there was an interesting piece in Economic Times in India about Elon Musk, which I thought was also kind of a good follow-up, because we, in that episode that we did, Billionaires in Space, we spent quite a bit of our time talking about what billionaires are doing right here on planet Earth and their huge, excessive footprints. So there's a story in Economic Times in India, and I'll include a link in the show notes to that. Just a couple of highlights. On July 14th, Musk tweeted about population decline. He tweeted, "Population collapse is a much bigger problem than people realize, and that's just for Earth. Mars has a great need for people, seeing as population is currently 0. Humans are the custodians of other life on Earth. Let us bring life to Mars."
Yeah, so the comment about being the custodians of life on Earth,
Yeah.
he just seems so out of touch with reality. You think about all of the species that are going extinct, and he's talking about, well, let's do the same thing on other planets. It's like, what?
I guess some people think God appointed us as custodians, but I think science is trying to convince us that we're not. We need to be good shepherds, but it isn't all about us. We're not in charge. And he seems to think we're in charge if he says we're custodians. And if we are in charge, boy, the job we're doing sucks big time.
Yeah, we should be fired.
Yeah, as you pointed out.
Yeah, the population collapse thing is also so interesting to me, because I know that there are some groups out there that are really putting forth this idea and trying to spread that idea. But I don't get the sense that a lot of people buy into that. I think a lot of people, if they hear the message about overpopulation and the connection between population growth and overpopulation and the impact on habitat, on climate change, more people equals more impact. Mm-hmm. I think most people get that concept, and they understand that 7 billion, 8 billion, 9 billion, 10 billion people on the planet isn't sustainable. So why does Elon not subscribe to that? There's this other worldview. Like, where is he getting his information? Why is he buying into that viewpoint? Yeah,
that's the puzzling thing. Why is someone, Elon Musk must be brilliant to have accomplished what he's accomplished. So it is weird that he thinks that population collapse is a problem at all. And of course, this was a tweet that he sent out, and one person, a young lady, responded to that by tweeting, "I don't know. Would it be better to take care about the situation here on Earth? I'm not sure that spending so much money for Mars travel is a good way to go." And this wasn't some super big champion, with thousands of Twitter followers. This was just, I think, an everyday, ordinary person out there in the Twitter sphere. So I was glad to see that. Those were much smarter words than Elon's.
Yeah, I have to think that most people, if they really think about it, are going to kind of come to the same conclusion. It's, we have so many issues here on Earth. What's the point? And maybe in the long term, after many years of research and investment, something could happen on one of these other planets or in outer space. But we just have so much to do here on planet Earth. Let's focus on that. It just feels so far in the future.
Anyway, I don't know how many people know, but I think Elon Musk has fathered 7 children. He lost 1, so he's got 6 living children. So he's certainly doing his part individually to stave off population collapse. But we got to hope most people recognize that population collapse it's not happening, for one thing, and it would have to collapse a lot before it would be a concern. It really would be good news.
Yeah. Can you imagine if everyone on the planet had 7 children? What kind of planet would we have?
Oh.
Does anyone want to live on that planet?
Well, if you want to get a glimpse of it, you might check out the movie Soylent Green sometime. It's a science fiction movie that people like to laugh at, but
that could very well be our future.
Yeah. I mean, a month doesn't go by that I don't think about that and think, whatever I've read in the news just now, it seems like we're one step closer to that dystopian future. Interesting thing, kind of related to the Billionaires subject, is a survey results that just came out. Climate Nexus, in a partnership with the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication and the George Mason University Center for Climate Change Communication, did a survey at the end of September, and they found strong voter support for increasing taxes on wealthy individuals and corporations in order to pay for additional infrastructure investments. About 2/3 of voters support enacting a wealth tax of 2% on individuals' net worth over $50 million. They favored raising taxes on individuals making more than $452,700 a year. I don't know where that number came from. And married couples making more than $509,300 a year. And then they also favored increasing the capital gains tax on individuals making more than $1 million. I think that's pretty good news that there's that much public support for what really is not nearly enough, hate to say it, but redistribution of wealth. I'm trying to figure out whether I want to be labeled a socialist or not. I think, socialism in a lot of cases is the best of what we do in government, where we all get together and we try to make life better for everyone. And we know that the vast inequities in wealth today are not good. They're not completely earned by the people that have those billions and billions. The way that they spend those, their footprints are obscene and definitely excessive. And the unrest that this is setting us up for, it's just a wind up for a really ugly future world. We've got to get our hands on the inequities and not just redistribute what the billionaires have, but redistribute what the richest 2 or 3 billion people on the planet. We've all got to scale back and make room for the poorest 4 billion, 5 billion on the planet, to at least just to meet their needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, before we wrap things up, Stephanie, 2 novelists walk into a bar. Not really, but I ran across just over the weekend this really interesting quote, and it was a story that novelist Kurt Vonnegut told that really happened, and it was originally published in The New Yorker in 2005. And he said, "True story, word of honor. Joseph Heller, an important and funny writer now dead, and I were at a party given by a billionaire on Shelter Island. I said, 'Joe, how does it make you feel to know that our host only yesterday may have made more money than your novel Catch-22 has earned in its entire history. And Joe said, I've got something he can never have. And I said, what on earth could that be, Joe? And Joe said, enough. We'll include a link or two in the show notes to that story. It's an interesting story, and it's been used in commencement speeches and written about time and again. And I don't know, Stephanie, I think that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. This was really poignant. I'm glad that you found this and shared it with me, and I plan to share it with other folks as well. And one thing that I wanted to ask you about, Dad, is what do you think is enough from your point of view as you've approached life and you've been faced with decisions around, do I, climb the corporate ladder or become an entrepreneur that just tries to make more and more money every year versus doing something meaningful and that's going to give back and contribute in a positive way to others and to the planet. How have you faced that question of what is enough in your personal life?
Well, for many, many years, I was, sleepwalking through life and chasing that American dream, the hijacked version that so many people chase, where I, measured my success and meaning in life by my possessions. How nice a car was I driving and how big a house were we living in? And, and really proud of the fact that I was earning, a pretty decent living producing propaganda films for Fortune 500 companies, and I wanted to have that country club membership and the nice cars and all of that. And it took, an epiphany for me to realize that, some of that stuff might be nice. It's kind of nice to, to play a round of golf on a really beautiful patch of manicured grass. I'm going to admit that. And I would rather not give up playing golf. Of course, I gave up the country club membership a long time ago when I decided to become a starving documentary filmmaker. But when I did give up all of that and stopped trying to earn a lot of money and really began to earn virtually nothing for over a decade now, it kind of forced me to come to terms with what really is important in life. And I found it. I found so much more joy in things like spending more time with my kids, more time on romance, more time on walks with my wife. I'm really proud of myself now if I, lay down in the hammock and just goof off a little bit. Much more proud of myself for doing that than I would ever be for, meeting some kind of financial milestone. But I know from my time in those decades working for those Fortune 500 companies that there's this whole other culture of winning, of competition, of being better than the next company and earning more money than your next door neighbor. And it's when you're in it, I think it's pretty hard to see it. Mm-hmm. So for me, enough is just to have a roof over my head and to have food on the table and to have time with my loved ones. That's enough.
Well, thanks for sharing that. It's something that I have definitely been struggling with entering my mid-30s and something that I see my peers struggle with too. I think we are in this sort of trap of advertisements or, just walking down a neighborhood street where you see a nicer, bigger house than where you live. And you kind of think, oh, that's what I'm supposed to have. That's what I'm striving for. And I'm, why I'm going to show up to my kind of corporate brain killing job to try and make more money every year. And I think I'm really, really glad that you found this story and that you're sharing it, because I think it's a really good reminder to get out of that mindset and focus on the things that you do have and the people that you have in your life and the quality of things as opposed to quantity of things. So good advice for me and some of my friends as well.
Thanks. I will suck a little bit of the great wind out of those sails just by saying, however, if you do the math right now for 8 billion people to live sustainably on the planet, I won't go into the details behind that math, but if anybody wants to know the details, write to podcast@growthbusters.org and I'll share that with you. But if you do the math, we all need to be living as though we were earning about $5,000 or $6,000 a year. That's it. In other words, we all would have to our idea of enough would have to be extremely basic. And, my idea of a good life is a little above that. I'm kind of pissed off that we, for 100 years, ignored what was happening to human population and didn't do anything about it. So now here we are at 8 billion, where, the only rational thing to do is to simplify our lives to the extreme. I think we all deserve to live a little bit better than that. So I think ultimately I'd like to see us get some kind of a balance where we're at 2 or 3 billion people on the planet, and everybody doesn't have to live on $5,000 or $6,000 a year, but maybe is getting by on a lifestyle that would equate to, I don't know, $20,000 a year or something like that. But you just can't have billions and billions of people living the $100,000 a year plus lifestyle. Sorry. Planet won't let us do that.
Yeah, that's such a great point to think about. What is the definition of enough? Is enough the real bare minimum here, where you have barely enough food, energy, water, shelter? Or is it more of a more comfortable place where you have the time to spend leisure time doing things for your own health, like exercise, playing sports? There's got to be a right balance in there, and the population side of that equation is key.
Yep. So last thing before we go is, honey, I shrunk my footprint. Have you got something to share about something that you do to live more lightly on the planet?
I actually am not prepared this time with that. So do you want to go first while I try and think of something?
Sure. And I'm going to cheat because I'm going to circle back to what I think I shared the very first time we did this segment, which I think was probably in 2018. And it was not sitting still in an automobile with the engine idling. And I was reminded of that the other day and wanted to bring it up because this time of year, we're in the fall in the northern hemisphere, and we're not deep into winter yet, but it's cool enough that if you're sitting still in a car, you really don't need to have the air conditioning running, and yet it's not so cold that you really need to have the heater on in the car. If you're sitting there in the car waiting for your partner who's doing a little bit of shopping real quick, or waiting to pick up a kid, or waiting in line for some fast food, God forbid, there's just no reason to leave the engine on. If you're doing that, you are burning fossil fuels and you're emitting carbon emissions, and you're doing that for nothing. You don't need the heat. You don't need the air conditioning. You just are not thinking about what you're doing. And this came to mind because I went to the grocery store and I walked by a car that was there was somebody in there, and they were just sitting there reading their email on their phone with the motor running.
That's the worst, isn't it?
And it's just senseless. So I obsess a little bit, go out of my way to make sure if I'm sitting in a car and it's not going anywhere for 30 seconds or more, I'm turning the thing off.
Yeah, I was outdoor eating at a restaurant the other day because everyone has sort of gotten creative with their outdoor dining spaces. This particular restaurant had built some outdoor dining area in their parking lot. And so we were outside at the table, and some other folks were leaving the restaurant, get in their car that's parked literally right next to our table, turn the engine on and just sit there. And meanwhile, we're out there breathing in the exhaust fumes and the noise, and the headlights were shining right at us. It's kind of like, okay, maybe just a little courtesy would be nice.
Yeah, maybe when gasoline costs $10 a gallon, maybe people will think about that. But, it's a little thing. It costs you nothing. In fact, it saves you money. And so that's my rant. I'm proud of the fact that I'm obsessive compulsive about it. I wish everybody was, because it's easy. Yeah. And if you won't do the easy things, what hope do we have that you might do the hard ones? Yeah,
that's a great one. So I thought of something, which is I have a computer monitor at home at my work from home setup. And I used to go into an office 5 days a week and had a couple of computer monitors, and my laptop would sort of dock to them. And every night before leaving the office, I would turn off my monitors. And man, it was hard to get into that habit. I had to write myself a sticky note for a while, and oftentimes I would forget. But slowly over time, I built the habit in where I would just hit my power buttons before leaving the office every day. And it became second nature. And when I moved my office to home, I do it automatically without even really thinking about it as I click the button at the end of the day. And so just a small thing, but I think just the power of forming those little habits. Or, for example, my fiance is terrible about leaving the light in our basement on. It's not a living space. It's just sort of utility and stored down there. But for a long time, he was just leaving the basement and leaving the light on. And, I kind of was like, hey, why don't you just try and just a few times turn the light switch off. And by golly, he's been able to turn it into a habit, because if you're doing that same thing over and over again, it's just becomes on autopilot or second nature. So the power of habit.
Yeah. The critics will say, well, that's, a pittance. The energy savings from those habits are not enough to end the climate disruption that we're in the middle of. However, think about, it's not just you doing that. What if millions of people are not sitting idling in their car? What if millions of people are not leaving lights on that are lighting a space that doesn't require any light? There's some power in that if enough people are doing it. And of course, I harp on this a lot. I think if everybody is living in a world where everybody is doing that, it's contagious, and more people will do that. And if your mindset is to not be wasteful, then you will think of other ways to not waste energy consumption. And if you get elected to public office, it'll be a whole lot easier for you to vote for public policy that will alter the system. People think that, you're not talking about system altering policies, but if the policymakers they all grew up in houses where nobody cared, they left the lights on, there wasn't a conservation ethic. I think if there's a conservation ethic everywhere from this day forward, it'll be so much easier for every human being to do the right thing.
Absolutely. Great way to end our episode today.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. I'm so excited to have you as co-host, Stephanie. I appreciate the time that you're investing in this. And anyone who's listening who's still here for this part of the episode, the bonus is you're going to hear some great lyrics from that GrowthBusters theme, which hopefully we'll be able to play the whole thing for you with the music video when we finish that, maybe just in a few months. And don't forget to head over to fundraiser.com/GrowthBusters movie to help out with the campaign to make the GrowthBusters documentary free. Thanks a lot for listening to GrowthBusters.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some may just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather. But no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling. Call the growth busters.